What's up, heathens?
How y'all doing?
I'm the Godless engineer, and I critically analyze apologist claims to give you the best arguments and information so that you can stand up and use your voice. Today, we're going to be taking a look at the second video by Pastor Dave Earley of Dave Earley Ministries, where he's painstakingly explaining to his Christian audience why people are atheists. Now, of course, because he is explaining to a Christian audience why people are atheists, he's only going to be presenting straw men today. This is going to be a peek through those Christian lenses that a lot of apologists look at us through. And boy, is it a horrible lens to look at any group of people through. So if y'all heathens want to fuck around and find out how Dave Earley misrepresents why atheists become atheists, then please stay tuned. Alright, heathen, so before we get into today's video, being that I am an atheist, I thought that I would give you my reasons for being an atheist. It's definitely not anything that Dave is going to touch on today. I am an atheist because I do not see sufficient evidence to suggest that a God does exist. This comes from an informed, in-depth look at the evidence for a God. I have weighed both sides of the argument, both the secular or non-theist arguments against the theist arguments and the theist arguments against the non-theist arguments. I've done a very thorough job of looking at both sides of this issue, and I just cannot see any kind of good evidence that the theist side has to support their position. And that's pretty much all that the non-theist side does, is say, hey, there's a problem with your evidence. It doesn't actually prove the things that you're wanting it to prove. The non-theist side is not making some kind of grandiose claim that God doesn't exist and that we have evidence he doesn't exist. The only form that that particular argument takes is when we're talking about specific definitions of God. Dave Earley's particular definition of God definitely doesn't exist, and I have evidence to show that he does. But as far as being an atheist in general, as opposed to being some other religion other than Dave Earley's religion, I just don't see any sufficient evidence to suggest that a God does exist. And it's not because I'm just woefully ignorant of the evidence or I just haven't looked at the evidence or anything like that. I've definitely investigated it, and I have come to the conclusion that God probably doesn't exist. All right, now that that boilerplate shit's out of the way, let's get on into this video.
Why do people become atheists? What is it that brings someone to the place where they say, there is no God, there's no God in the universe? How can they say that? How did they get there?
Oh, God. So obviously I've already answered his question right off the bat, so I didn't mean to do that. But I already answered his question here, why do people become atheists? Now, I'm only answering for myself, obviously, not answering for other people, but I have heard from a plethora of atheists that lack of good evidence to sufficiently support the claim that God does exist as being the primary thing that prevents them from believing in a God. But the whiteboard on this motherfucker right now is just fucking insane. Obviously, lack of evidence seems on the surface to be what I'm getting at, the lack of good evidence. But it's also paired with ignorance. I can't for the life of me think as to why Dave Earley and his lack of evidence to support his conclusion would somehow mean that I'm ignorant. Maybe he means that he's ignorant of good evidence. Like, well, we just don't know about any kind of good evidence that would convince them. That could be it. I wonder if that's where he's going with this first line there. And then there's disappointment. Oh man, I am very disappointed with the amount of evidence or the amount of arguments, good arguments for God. Because it's not that I want God not to be real or something. I am very disappointed with the amount of evidence or the lack thereof for this God that supposedly exists and created everything. And then finally, defiance, which seems like a whole lot of, or the Bible tells me so type shit. So I can't wait to get to there. It seems like the defiance is what he's really going to harp on here, considering he's got much more items bulleted underneath. So it seems like he's focusing on that a lot. Maybe he thinks that is the main thing that creates atheists, is just us stomping our feet like little children and being like, I don't want to believe in God. No, fuck God. I want to be my own God and suck my own dick and everything like that. Maybe that's what he's going to get to at that point. I don't know. Let's see. Let's let's fuck around and find out, shall we?
Well, I think there are three main causes, reasons why people become atheists. A lack of evidence. I had a friend, he grew up in a home, both his parents were atheists, they were professors. He was taught from birth, there is no God. So he was ignorant of all the evidence that there was a God. He spent 2.5 years studying the Bible with me, and at the end of that time, he got on his knees and gave his life to the true and living God, and he's followed God the rest of his life.
Okay, so basically what you're saying here with number one is that atheists are atheists because they just haven't been presented with the arguments for God, or they haven't been exposed to this crazy idea that God exists. And so they just haven't been exposed to the arguments for it. I feel like the situation that he's describing here, which I'm not going to sit here and tell him that it's not a real situation. I mean, it very well could be, I guess. I think that it's very much an outlier in especially America. Like, I don't know where in the fuck Dave Earley grew up at, but it must be a different fucking dimension, because that particular situation simply doesn't happen, at least enough to be considered one of the main reasons why atheists are atheists. Like, in that particular context, I think that the probability was working against him that even fucking happened. But in any case, let's take it as if it were to have really happened. This is simply not what most atheists go through, or in the context of it being one of the biggest reasons why people are atheists. This is not one of them. It's not that I haven't researched the subject or anything. I guess it's exactly the opposite to what he says, because I grew up indoctrinated that God definitely exists, and I had never came into contact with any kind of argument against God existing. Once I got exposed to the idea that God might not exist, and I started doing an in-depth analysis on the arguments for God and against God, I found overwhelmingly the theist position just did not have the evidence to back up the claim that God exists. So there's really no reason to consider God to exist like by default. I just have to wonder if he's ever actually talked to an atheist. You would think so by the way that he describes his friend there, but I really cannot see anybody that grew up with an atheist and believe that this is a significant portion of the atheist demographic, that this is how they grew up. I feel like this is a very small outlier portion of the demographic.
He was just lacking evidence. He was ignorant. Other people become atheists because they're disappointed. Something bad happened to them. They experienced a great trauma. They really wanted something to turn out a certain way, and it didn't turn out that way. So they got mad at God. If God is sovereign, then God should have fixed this. God should have changed that. God should have done this. So they get disappointed with God. So they say, well, there just is no God. If he's not the way I want him, then there is no God.
Now, I have a couple of different grievances with this particular bullet point that he's got. For one thing, just to point this out at first, he references this as if like one thing happened to people, a person, a Christian, and they were disappointed with the outcome of it, and so they just sort of threw down their hands and childishly gave up on God. This is not a true representation of what happens when Christians don't exactly get their way when it comes to whatever they want God to do, because a lot of times whenever something bad happens to a Christian or something like that, it only strengthens their faith. They read in the Bible how God tests people's faith all the time. And so it's like, this is a test of faith, to not just, give up God. So it strengthens their faith. On occasion though, it does happen that something happens to a person that's horrible. They lose a parent to cancer, or they lose a child, or something horrible happens to a person. And they just can't fathom a God, a good God, an all good God. That's the basis of morality, allowing something like that to happen. And so it makes them question what they've been taught. I feel like it's a total misrepresentation to sit there and state that, atheists, they were a Christian and then they just ran into a few hard times, or one hard time, something bad happened to them, so they just throw their hands up and they just give up on God. It makes it seem like he thinks that it's an easy road to get to the atheist position, when it's really not. It's definitely not. He makes it seem like people can just throw up their hands and be like, I'm done with fucking God. Fuck his ass. Fuck your couch, God. That's just simply not how it happens. Now, number two, I don't see anything wrong with being disappointed in either the evidence for God or something happening in your life that just does not seem to make sense if God were real. I don't see finding disappointment in that and then exploring that idea, like, oh, well, why did God allow this to happen? And for that path to lead towards atheism, I don't see that as a bad thing or a negative thing. Of course, Dave Earley here is presenting it as if it's just, oh, they just give up easy, like it's an easy give up and then to become atheist. The path that people walk towards their final atheist conclusion is not an easy path to walk. Like, it's very difficult because you're talking about undoing years and years of indoctrination at times. Of course, that's not indicative of everybody. Not everybody's been indoctrinated for years and years, but if you're talking about an atheist in the United States, more than likely that person was a Christian who was taught Christian theology all throughout their life. Or they could have also been the more relaxed, Christian who was always taught that Christianity is true, and they would go to church, but which is more like me. I was taught that I was a Christian. I believed that God exists, and I just sort of lackadaisically went about my faith. And I think that that's a totally fine way to take Christianity. He acts like either of those people just sort of get disappointed in God one day and become an atheist. And that's a total misrepresentation of what atheists go through. I get the sense he's literally never talked to an atheist, yet he's providing some kind of weird fucking TED talk on why people become atheists. It's like, hey Dave, could you speculate out of your ass about why people take up this one particular position without you having any kind of research or knowledge into why these people think the way that they do? Think you could speculate right out your ass about it? Oh, you can you? Oh, well, we have a 3-part series that we want you to do for our church. Damn, Dave, could you do some fucking research or something?
Third is defiance. It says in Romans chapter 1, and we're going to read this in a minute, that they've suppressed the truth. They know that there's a God, but they've suppressed the truth of God. They're choosing to say there is no God.
Oh, God damn it. I fucking hate this one. This is so common coming from Christian apologists. Atheists just want to be defiant against God. We all know that God exists. We just don't want him to exist so that we can, do something, I guess, that you can't do as a Christian. Which is always really weird to me, because even as a Christian, I found myself doing the exact same things that I do now as an atheist. I just have less guilt about it, I guess. Feeling guilty for perfectly normal things, like masturbation or finding some girl attractive. These are things that are not bad, but Christianity makes you feel bad about it. They make you feel guilty about these things, and they're not things to feel guilty about. And so it's kind of weird how he portrays it as, oh, well, atheists just want to be defiant. They want to suppress the truth about God's existence. Could it possibly be, Dave? Now, hear me out. I know this is going to be tough. We've investigated the evidence and we are not convinced. That's not a personal decision. That's not a decision to be defiant towards God. That's not a decision to suppress the quote unquote knowledge of God. I don't control what convinces me. I am just either convinced or unconvinced. And the evidence that you have for your God especially is just unconvincing. And I have no idea why people are convinced by the evidence. That's what's confusing to me. And I feel like a lot of the times that through, cognitive dissonance and, trying to resolve that uncomfortable feeling of different ideas clashing, that a lot of times this is an actual, scientifically proven thing that happens. It's actually Christians that will oftentimes suppress evidence against their beliefs. That's one of the ways to mitigate cognitive dissonance, is to just ignore the new information that conflicts with your pre-existing ideas about how the world works, and you're just going to ignore it, and you're going to suppress it, if you will. So it baffles me that this entire video is like the exact opposite of how reality actually works, at least for the atheist demographic. This video should just be titled, "We are gonna mindfuck atheists for about 7 minutes and gaslight the shit out of them. God damn it, it's great to be a Christian, isn't it?" I feel like that should be the title of the video, not fucking atheism number 2. Why?
It's not an intellectual matter for them, really, but it's a matter of the will.
I can guarantee you it's an intellectual thing for me. Because there's no good evidence for God, therefore I don't believe that God exists, and that's totally an intellectual matter. If God definitely exists, then there definitely should be evidence that supports his existence, and there's just simply not that. So it's totally an intellectual thing.
And I think that's a primary reason why people become atheists, to the people I've talked. You talk to them long enough, you realize this is what the issue is. You can say,
no, this is not the primary reason. Obviously, he is looking at the entire conversation through his Christian lens, because he cannot fathom a good reason to be an atheist unless you want to just be defiant against God. That seems to be what he thinks is the ultimate thing that turns people to an atheist, is that they just say, fuck God, I don't care about your rules, I'm just gonna live my life breaking your fucking rules. This is such a misrepresentation of why people are atheists.
if I gave you all the evidence and enough evidence to believe, would you give your life to God? And they say no. They still want to do life without God.
Well, yes, primarily because the idea of God does not comport with reality. As far as we can tell right now with the evidence that we're given, God is not an accurate representation of how reality works. That's why we don't believe it. It'd be a lot like me asking you, why don't you believe in the Loch Ness Monster? Come on, Nessie needs $3.50 and she needs it all the time. Give it to her, bitch. I wouldn't believe that. I don't expect you to believe that. But you asking me, hey, why don't you believe in God? Is it because you want to be defiant? It's a lot like me saying, why don't you want to give Nessie $3.50? Is it because you just want to be defiant against Nessie, not give her that $3.50 for whatever the fuck she needs? You see how that just seems like really crazy and unreasonable? That's how you come off to me when you say this kind of shit.
It's a matter of arrogance. It says in Psalm 10, verse 4, the wicked in his proud countenance, in his pride, does not seek God. God is in none of his thoughts. He has no room for God.
Well, right. I don't have any room in my life for God because I don't believe in him. It's a lot like the amount of room I have for leprechauns. Every time I see a rainbow, I don't go trying to chase the end of the fucking rainbow so I can get the leprechaun's gold stash. I just don't devote any of my life to that endeavor. Just like with God, I don't devote any of my life into sucking his dick. That's because he probably doesn't exist. And any kind of benefit I could get from sucking God's dick is not going to come to fruition, just like I'm never going to get that pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. So no, I don't seek God because I don't believe in God. And that's not a position that I can willfully choose. Like, I don't choose to be an atheist. I'm just unconvinced of the evidence, and that's not something that I can just make happen.
His pride, I don't need God. And I've talked to a lot of people like that.
Have you though? I really don't think that you have. I feel like this is a conversation that you've never had with an actual atheist.
Some people, it's just wickedness. It says in Psalm 14, verse 1, the fool has said in his heart, there is no God. And if I say there is no God, then they become corrupt. They've done abominable works. There's none that does good.
Now, I could easily point out how this is For the Bible Tells Me So, right? With that nice little jingle that you guys love from Paula G. To tackle this a bit more, I guess, intellectually, to explain why For the Bible Tells Me So is so powerful, is that this particular verse does not comport with reality whatsoever. And it's literally just some asshole back in like the BCE time era that is saying this shit. There are obviously atheists in this world that do good work. They're not corrupt. Just take this channel here, Godless Engineer. We take the money that we make off of this channel and we donate some of it to charity. How is this not a good thing? How is this an abominable work? How is this Godless Engineer being corrupt? I'm just like you there. Well, no, I'm not just like you, Dave. I'm not that much of a dipshit. I'm just saying that, like, as far as Christians in general, I'm just like you. I just don't believe in a God because I've investigated the evidence and I'm not convinced. Like, that's the difference here. As far as the morals go, I feel like there are certain segments of the Christian community where I definitely have a better moral system than they do, but I'm not going to try to paint the entire demographic of Christians as being in that one demographic, because pretty plainly the demographic of Christians out there, it's changing. Like, that moral foundation they claim is absolute and can only be attributed to God is shifting all the time. And right now it's shifting in a direction that's a little bit more progressive, a little bit more liberal at times. Although there is a very large portion of the Christian demographic that is trying to hold on to 1950s Christian nationalism and white nationalism and all that kind of stuff. That's a very significant portion of the demographic, but I'm not trying to paint everybody as being a part of that demographic. But as far as this particular instance goes, I'm morally no different than Christians out there. I don't see this particular verse as comporting with reality. And that's why For the Bible tells me so is so important and encapsulates everything wrong with just spouting Bible verses at people.
You see, if I say there's no God, there's no accountability, so I can do any wicked thing I want, and it's not wicked because I say it's okay.
I'm sorry, does this motherfucker live in some kind of anarchist society that's controlled by Christianity? Because last time I checked, whether or not I believed in a God, I'm still held accountable by my community, by my country, by the world in general. I don't understand what you mean when you say that because we don't believe in a God, that means we can do whatever wicked thing we want to and it's all okay, it's all right. I'll get away with it because I don't believe in a God. You're still held accountable by the society that you live in. So no, just because I don't believe in a God doesn't mean that I can just do whatever I want to, okay? Now, does this mean that I'm not held to your particular moral standards and I can deem some of your moral standards to be just awful? Yes, it does. But this is no different than Christians throughout time. This is no different mechanism than what's happened to Christianity since its inception, because the moral foundations of Christianity have changed vastly over time. Prior to the freeing of the slaves and the end of the Civil War in 1865, you had Christians that were perfectly fine with enslaving other people because that's what God says is righteous in the Old Testament. It's perfectly legal from God's point of view. So that sentiment changed not because the religion changed or anything that was written down in the Bible changed. It's because people didn't think that it was okay to own other people as property. And so they changed their interpretation of what their Bible said and thus changed this absolute moral foundation that apparently exists for all time, but yet constantly is changing. So the fact that I have a different moral foundation than Dave Earley here is no different than anything that's ever happened before in the past when concerned with our moral foundation. Dave has his own shitty moral foundation based on the Bible and this reading of the Bible that's specific to him, his congregation, and whoever else is in his particular demographic within Christianity. But then you have people that are completely opposed to a lot of the moral foundations that he has, that he attributes to God, like hating the LGBTQ community. That's not indicative of the entirety of the Christian landscape. That's pretty specific to the bigoted portions of the Christian demographic, which Dave Earley finds himself in. It's just amazing to me how God can have so many different moral foundations. You would think that the one true God would have one fucking moral foundation, not fucking 50,000 of them.
The third one is idolatry. And this is the main one. If I say there's no God, then I get to be God. It says in Romans chapter 1, for the wrath of God is revealed from heaven.
We're not going to listen to him reading all of these Bible passages. That's just fucking ridiculous. Again, for the Bible tells me so here, I'm somehow becoming God by rejecting God. And I guess in this particular instance, what he means is that we're putting ourselves in God's place and being able to dictate what's morally good, what's morally bad. We're quote unquote worshiping ourselves, which I'm not exactly sure how you do. Maybe you just care about yourself more than you care about God, maybe. I mean, I'm not exactly fucking sure. I definitely think that every person is more important than fucking God. But primarily because I don't think God exists. But a lot of people out there do think God exists, and they think that God should be the most important thing in your life. And I think that's bullshit. Other people, you yourself, should be the most important things because this is the only life that we get. I feel like it's a bit of a waste to focus your life on praising God and making everything about God. It seems like a waste to me. I get that it's not seen as a waste to Christians out there that are trying to praise God in everything that they do. But I feel like I have more to do with my life than worry about sucking God dick all the time.
For God has shown it to them. There's plenty of evidence. The creation has the Creator's fingerprints all over it. Your conscience has the Creator's fingerprints all over it. Your longing for eternity has the Creator's fingerprints all over it.
I don't have a longing for eternity. I definitely don't see the Creator's fingerprints all over our consciousness. I would love to know what he thinks are the fingerprints, like on creation, on our consciousness, on this eternal longing for eternity. Like, I don't know if anybody's ever thought about actually living forever, but I think that actually living forever would make you go insane. To explain what this eternal longing is, this longing for eternity, I think that it has something to do with the survival instinct that we have as living organisms. And all living organisms have this survival instinct, because if you had to pinpoint like a transcendent point to life or purpose to life, it's to live. It's kind of weird how Christians think the point of life is to, I guess, die and get to heaven. I might be wrong. I don't mean to indicate that everybody feels this way in Christianity, but I feel like a lot of the stuff in Christianity is about getting to the point where you die and you go to heaven and making sure that you can get to this eternity that exists afterwards. But I really think that it has roots in just surviving, because that, if you had to pin any kind of purpose to life, is what life is about. It's to live. Apparently, fuck me for just wanting to live my life to the fullest and not waste 1 minute of it on something that probably doesn't exist.
It says, for since the creation of the world, his invisible attributes are clearly seen.
I just wanted to let this part play because of that, of Romans 1:20. His invisible attributes, which are clearly seen. I'm sorry. If you can clearly see something, that negates the whole fact that it's fucking invisible. This is one of those married bachelor situations. If it's invisible, meaning that you can't see it, then it can't clearly be seen, motherfucker!
That's idolatry. And it leads to perversion. It says, therefore God gave them up to uncleanness in the lust of their hearts, to dishonor their bodies among themselves. Why is this incredible explosion of homosexuality and sexual perversion?
Wait, why is it only sexual perversion that you're talking about? I guess maybe perversion to him is only discussing sex. I mean, I'm not exactly sure. But he seems to focus on the LGBTQ community a lot in not only this video, but his other videos. I feel like it just exposes how much he hates the LGBTQ community. And he seems to be blaming people being an atheist on the idea that the LGBT community exists. Now, it's really weird because there are LGBTQ Christians out there. So obviously, it's not the fact that people are gay or are part of that community that they are an atheist, if they happen to be both of those, be part of both of those demographics. Because obviously there are Christians that are part of that demographic too, the LGBTQ demographic. So this entire point number 4 seems to just totally ignore the fact that LGBTQ Christians exist. This entire point kind of makes him a piece of shit.
Because when you have enough people going into idolatry, it leads you to perversion. God says, if you want to serve, if you want to worship yourselves, worship yourself, but I'm stepping out of the picture.
Okay, good. Bye, Felicia. Get the fuck out of here. But that's besides the point, because obviously we're not worshiping ourselves as God. We're not turning ourselves into God or anything like that. I mean, shit, if I was to turn myself into God, I would definitely give myself the ability to fly places. That would cut down on commute time if I do have to go into work. I mean, there's just so many things that if I were to turn myself into God that I would give myself. Fuck. Make my house float in the sky so that I don't have to be around any motherfucker, because I would really just rather not deal with them. Lo and behold, I can't do that because I'm still just human and I haven't made myself God. So I don't know what in the fuck you're talking about. Just like with the disappointment thing, it's not bad to focus on yourself and to be happy without God. That's not a bad thing. But you see, he has to paint it as a bad thing, because if you can be happy with yourself, if you can be happy living your life without God, that's bad for him, because that's less people in the pews, that's less people donating money to him, and that's less people in his religion. I'm not saying that that's his main motivation for what amounts to, I feel like, lying about atheists. The whole premise of painting the people that don't believe in their particular religion as being bad, as being as suppressing truth and all this other stuff and othering these people is all about maintaining numbers. It's like going back to the origination of the Christian cult. It's about maintaining numbers, and that's all he's following through with. Whether or not he consciously has that goal, that is still what the original goal was.
It says, for this reason God gave them up to vile passion. Their women exchanged the natural use for what is against nature. The men, leaving the natural use of the woman, burned in their lust for one another. Men committing what is shameful and receiving in themselves the penalty of their error.
Oh no, not people. Oh, the horror. Oh, dear Jesus. Oh my God. Not LGBTQ people. Grow the fuck up, Dave Earley. He goes on to list more Bible verses and read more from the Bible about how we're wicked and how we just want to live in unrighteousness and how we just want to do whatever in the fuck we want to do. This is a big misrepresentation of the atheist community. Because we're not wicked and we don't hate God. Because we don't believe in God. How can you hate something that you don't believe in?
We just had a whole month in our country celebrating homosexuality. That's described right there. That's perversion.
No. Celebrating the existence of the LGBTQ community and celebrating them as a demographic is a good thing because they've been oppressed for the longest time. Your own book prescribes death for them. Christians have persecuted that community for the longest time, and it's okay to be proud to be in that community because there's nothing wrong with being in that community. And shitty fucking people like Dave Earley right here will never get why it's okay because they have their nose so far up God's asshole that they will never see the light of day on that issue. This is the mark of a person that you just simply do not fucking need in your life. Like anybody, not just the LGBTQ community out there, fucking everybody.
It's because of idolatry. It's because people choose not to worship God.
Well, I mean, we're not worshiping God because we don't believe he exists and we can't control that. So yeah, you could turn this entire video around on him, but for a different religion. Like, oh, you're just suppressing the information of Allah or Buddha or whoever in the fuck else you want to worship. Goddamn Loch Ness Monster Nessie. Worship her and give her $3.50 for fuck's sake. But you just want to suppress that knowledge and unrighteousness because you want to unrighteously serve this other god instead of paying Nessie her $3.50. See, you could just turn this entire video around on him with whatever in the fuck else because it would be the exact same arguments. It would make the exact same kind of impact on him, meaning that it would have no impact. He'd be confused as to why are you chastising me about not paying some random fucking Loch Ness monster named Nessie $3.50? Like, I don't believe that fucker exists, so I am not going to pay them $3.50. And it's like, oh, well, that's how I feel about your fucking God there, Dave. Sorry, I'm having an argument with myself.
Look, there is a God. There's plenty of evidence for God. And he designed the universe so the only way it really works is if he is in the center. And the only way your life works is if he is your God and you do what he says.
Oh, well, that doesn't seem fascist in the least bit now, does it? Also, if the entire universe revolves around God, why does it seem to operate perfectly fine without God's assistance? Because as far as we can determine, God isn't necessary for anything in this universe. Everything happens naturally, and if it happens naturally, that means that there's no intervention by God. So it kind of seems like God isn't needed for the universe to operate. God is obviously not needed for my life to operate fine. I'm living a really good life without God. I don't understand why everything has to operate based on God's calendar, God's timeline, on God's say-so. I mean, maybe your life operates that way, but mine definitely fucking doesn't. So I would really encourage you to actually talk to an atheist and inform yourself before you make another dipshit fucking video like this. Well, heathens, that's going to be it for this video today. All in all, I'm very unimpressed with his presentation. All of his bullet points are just pure garbage. I don't even know why he thought it was a good idea to make the 2 videos that he did make. If God were to exist, he would know the exact kind, type, and quantity of evidence that I would need in order to believe in his shitty ass. The problem is that I have never seen it, and I'm probably never going to see it, because he probably, most likely, does not exist. Thank you, heathens, for joining me today. If you will, please go down below and let me know what you think about Dave Earley's presentation here. Do you think any of his points are solid, or do you think that they're all pretty much dumpster fiery trash? Let me know down below in the comments. And hey, while you're down there, why don't you smash that like button and subscribe if you're not already subscribed. Don't forget to stand up and use your voice. Bye, heathens.